Hello and welcome to History for Weirdos.
We're your hosts, Andrew
and Stephanie.
And each week, we're going to take you on a journey into the strange, obscure, and relentlessly entertaining corners of human history.
Now listen up, friends, because it's about to get weird. Welcome back, weirdos. We have another episode of History for Weirdos.
Welcome back, weirdos. I'm glad to be back. Steph's glad to be back. We're all glad to be back.
And for those of you watching the video version of this on our Patreon, right?
Oh, yeah.
Then you will see that we're on our couch. In fact, it's our new couch, weirdos.
And I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, we normally record at our dining room table when we record at home. But we're so proud of ourselves for building this couch over the weekend that we wanted to showcase it.
Absolutely. And it's just really comfortable. It's a lot more comfortable than sitting at the table, actually.
It's really comfy. Yeah, I have a big fuzzy blanket here. We're ready to go.
We're ready to rock and roll, as your dad would say.
Yeah, as I think a lot of dads would say at the end of dinner at the restaurant. Well,
I know. And before we even start, I just want to mention that one of the weirdos pointed out like a kind of a meme about me.
Oh,
where
yeah.
they're like, no one, absolutely no one. Andrew, every other episode, lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually kind of made my day, low key. And I'm almost positive. No, I am positive. I got that from your dad.
Yeah, my dad will do it in more of a British accent.
Yes.
You do it in a more unique voice, I will say. But when something's very much so like really dark or really bleak, my dad will just go, lovely. So that's where Andrew got that from.
Yeah, exactly. So now you know the lore.
Now you know the lore. Well, my love, without further ado, because I don't think we have any announcements.
No.
Will you please regale us with your weird history tale?
You know what? I absolutely will.
Nice.
So this one's a doozy. So, we did do an Egyptian pharaoh a few months ago when I covered Hatshepsut.
Yep.
And so now we're going to be covering another Egyptian pharaoh.
Okay, we're going back to Egypt.
Yes. And we're going to be covering the story of Akhenaten, who is known to history as the Heretic pharaoh.
That's a really good moniker. Is that the word?
Moniker, yeah.
That's a very good one.
I really enjoyed the research on this one, and big shout out to Felicia, as always, our research assistant.
Does an amazing job.
Absolutely. So before we even get into Akhenaten's life, I actually want to fast forward to the late 19th century.
Okay, let's go.
So we're starting off in a weird time period because there was a major archaeological discovery that was taking place at this time. So the legacy of Akhenaten prior to the late 19th century was gone to history, erased.
Oh, no one knew about him.
Exactly, just like Hatshepsut, funny enough.
Yeah.
And that was until archaeologists discovered the lost Egyptian city of Amarna.
Okay.
Or aka Akhenaten.
Oh.
I'm going to call it Amarna because it's just easier to say.
That's fair.
Yeah, and that's what it's known as today. So this city was built during the time of Akhenaten as pharaoh for the worship of the supreme god, the Aten, at least in his mind. Oh. And we'll get into all of that later on in this episode. But since this point, historians have had a really mixed view on him.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, so on one hand, he's described as enigmatic, mysterious, a revolutionary, and the greatest idealist of the world.
Oh my goodness.
On the other, though, he was a heretic, a fanatic, possibly insane, and mad.
Well, yeah, you're going to be one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe both.
Maybe both.
They're not mutually exclusive.
That's true.
So now that we have this scene set, let's get into the actual life of this heretic pharaoh and why he's called that.
Yeah, that's what I'm ready to hear.
Yeah, so Akhenaten was born as Amenhotep, and his birth year is unknown.
Of course.
And he would be called, early on in his reign, he would be Amenhotep IV.
I like that name better.
And I'm going to, even though technically he's not Amenhotep IV until after he becomes pharaoh. I'm just going to refer to him as that from now on. So, or at least for the time being. So some scholars place his birth during Amenhotep III's 25th regnal year, so 25th year on the throne, sometime between the years 1363 and 1361 BCE.
That gives us we get a good estimate at least.
Yeah, exactly. And this was during Egypt's 18th dynasty.
Wow.
Yes. And so before we even move on, I actually do want to mention something because Felicia wrote a note in here about some people might be confusing Amenhotep with Imhotep. Two very different people, separated by like 1,500 years roughly.
Yeah, their names sound super similar. That's what I thought of.
Yes, Imhotep was the vizier to Djoser, who was the first pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty.
Yeah.
So that's way back. And Imhotep is basically famous for being the architect of the first pyramid that we know of, like in the world.
Don't they use the name Imhotep in The Mummy?
Yes, Imhotep is the main villain in The Mummy.
Awesome.
Obviously not historically accurate. Don't like even remotely, like not even like forgetting the whole supernatural mummy thing. But I mean, like even his backstory is completely inaccurate.
Darn.
Hollywood.
I was going to take that.
And you know what's really frustrating about Hollywood, honestly, is that there are incredible stories in history that you don't really need to change the facts too much, or really at all. And you could just tell the story as it is, and they refuse to do it.
Yeah, there's incredible stories out there that they don't do justice.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it's not Imhotep from The Mummy, and it's not Imhotep who constructed the pyramids.
Exactly. This is Amenhotep.
Got it.
So he was the younger son of the pharaoh Amenhotep III and the pharaoh's principal wife, Queen T.
Okay.
His older brother, Thutmose, was the crown prince and heir to Amenhotep III's throne. He also had like 4 or 5 sisters. It's really hard to keep track of like the lineage because it is just wild. And also, to be fair, like this, we're talking about the late Bronze Age here. This is a long, long time ago.
That's so long ago. The fact that we know anything still amazes me.
Exactly. Especially when we consider that, you know, Akhenaten's or Amenhotep IV's, either one, his legacy had been lost to history up until, you know, a little over 100 years ago. So let's go back to Amenhotep. He was not expected to rise to the throne, right? He was the younger brother, and that was his deal. And also, again, just kind of reiterate, I'm referring to Amenhotep I'm referring to Akhenaten as Amenhotep right now because that's like what he's known by.
Yeah.
That will change though in the future, just not now. So let's get back to the narrative. The Fates, they had something big in store for Amenhotep IV. So Thutmose unfortunately dies at a young age and very quickly out of the blue. Amenhotep is now the next in line to be pharaoh, which happens pretty quickly. So he ascends to become the pharaoh anywhere between the ages of 10 to 23 years of age.
Oh, wow.
We're just not exactly sure.
Yeah, and that would look very differently depending.
Exactly. Like there could be a difference in the actual year itself. And not only that, but we're also not sure exactly when he was born or even when Amenhotep III's reign ended, started, all that stuff. So we're kind of just playing a little guesswork at this time. So Amenhotep, after becoming the pharaoh and becoming Amenhotep IV, like officially, he marries a very famous Egyptian queen. Any guesses as to who it could be?
Nefertiti?
It is Nefertiti.
Yeah.
And Nefertiti becomes his principal wife and is the biological mother of another famous pharaoh.
Oh, Tut?
Tut?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, I'm on a roll today.
Who we think is Akhenaten's son, but we're not entirely sure about that.
Oh.
We'll get into that later. It's a whole thing.
Good chisme there.
Good chisme. I mean, not like in the way you're thinking, but just our records are just completely like scattered. And also, let's just say this. There was a lot of strong familial relationships in this family.
I'm sure.
We'll expand on that. So it's really interesting because he also had a secondary queen named Kia, who we think might have been like a Mitanni princess.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And also, if it is her, she was also married to Amenhotep's father and then married the son.
Okay, I buy it.
Yeah.
That doesn't shock me.
Egyptologists aren't even sure how many children Akhenaten fathered.
Wow.
Being sure of at least 6 daughters and maybe 2 sons, one of them being Tut. Yeah, it's wild. Let's just say this family tree is insane. And, we can leave it at that, I guess.
Okay.
So most aspects of Amenhotep IV's early life are actually unknown. Scholars, though, have been trying to uncover clues about his upbringing to better understand the people who may have influenced him as he got older.
Yeah.
So one aspect of this, and it's really important to speculate on, is whether or not he had taken on the role of high priest of Ptah following his brother's death. As Ptah was the patron god of craftsmen, and since Amenhotep was known to have artistic inclinations, it would seem logical that that his appreciation for the creative arts would have been fostered during this time, and he would have been this high priest of Ptah.
Okay. That's interesting. So it's almost like how in England, for example, the monarch is also the head of the Anglican Church.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And it's a very ancient tradition across many different cultures.
Okay.
So as we look into his ascension, scholars are really uncertain as to the specific circumstances surrounding Amenhotep's ascension to becoming pharaoh. There are many who believe for a period between 2 to 12 years, he ruled as co-regent with his father. And then there are others that completely reject this idea entirely, believing he did not assume the throne until after his father's death.
Okay. So we have a lot of conflicting information.
Exactly. The one thing I can impart upon everyone here is that we really have very little clue into his early life, even into his early pharaohhood.
Okay.
In fact, even with Nefertiti, we know virtually nothing about her until she marries Akhenaten.
That's so wild to think about.
Amenhotep. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
Broke my own rule.
Yeah.
So, as late as in 2014, the tomb of Vizier Amenhotep Hui was found with an inscription listing both Amenhotep III and the Fourth's names, causing many to believe that this was conclusive evidence that the two ruled together. However, though, others point out that could simply mean that, the construction of the tomb started under, Amenhotep III and concluded during Amenhotep IV.
I could see both. And I will say, I think this is kind of unique to pharaohs, is the co-regency was pretty common.
It was, yeah.
If your kid was young, and you wanted to help them, right?
Exactly. And we did see that with Hatshepsut as well.
Yeah.
So there's starting to be a lot of similarities that I'm now just realizing between the two. And there will be more to come as well.
Oh, I'm excited to hear.
So either in 1353, maybe 1351 BC, Amenhotep IV was crowned as pharaoh. Again, we're not exactly certain. And again, he could have been 10 years old. He could have been 23 years old. We don't know. And Felicia even wrote in the comments here, what do we even know about this guy?
Yeah, nothing.
Nothing. So he was crowned as pharaoh, again, officially as Amenhotep IV. And the early portions of his reign are very traditional. He is not a heretic at all, especially at the very beginning.
Okay. He's following the rules.
Exactly. Famed Egyptologist Donald B. Redford has pointed out a few pieces of evidence which strongly suggests that it wasn't until after he became the pharaoh that Amenhotep IV began to shift his religious views, which makes a lot of sense.
I think so too.
Especially given if he was on the younger end of that age gap.
That's
right?
exactly what I was thinking. If he was an adolescent, that is the time where you're starting to develop your own worldview.
Yeah, exactly. And there are, according to Redford, several inscriptions bearing his name, showing him having worshipped several of the ancient Egyptian gods, as well as surviving texts from the era referring to the gods or every god and goddess, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's not necessarily a heretic or heretical thinking.
Yeah. He's...
Yeah, if you guys are watching video, you're getting an extra good treat right now.
Our our dog, Pericles, has just thrown his ball at me because he wants to play.
He literally has no idea what we're doing.
No.
He's just like, ball now.
So sorry for the puppy interruption, everyone.
Yes.
You were saying it's at this point in in his career as a pharaoh, he is following the traditional ancient Egyptian pantheon.
Exactly.
Okay.
And even to kind of expand upon that point, the high priest of Amun, who was the highest ranking priest within the highest, like the most prestigious priesthood, was still active even into Amenhotep IV's fourth regnal year.
Wow. Okay.
So at that point, no heresy.
No heresy so far.
Yeah.
Boring.
I know, right? Don't worry, though. That'll change, guys. That'll change. So Amenhotep IV's initial title upon becoming pharaoh was Amenhotep, God Ruler of Thebes, which is so badass.
Wow. I like it.
Yeah. And he started off his reign by continuing this construction his father had begun on the Karnak temple complex's precinct of Amun-Ra. And during this time, there are even images of him worshiping the combined form of the sun god Ra and the sky god Horus. So this is very traditional. This is not anything out of the ordinary yet.
Yeah. This is the ancient Egyptian religion that we're probably familiar with.
Yes, exactly. I'd say very familiar with, because like the ancient Egyptian religion that we all think of is probably comes from like New Kingdom Egypt.
Okay.
When Egypt was at its most powerful. So, and this sort of traditional, I don't know, like view though, is starting to crumble. And we start to see some of the seeds of hereticism, or AKA the fun stuff, start to emerge. So Amenhotep began to build a lot of temples, or like starting early on in his pharaohship.
I like pharaohhood.
Pharaohhood. Yeah, pharaohhood. I'm not sure if that's even a word or not.
His regency, I guess?
His regency, yeah. So he began building these temples for Aten, or the Aten. And basically the Aten, it's really confusing, but it's the disc that is associated typically with like Amun-Ra.
Okay.
And it is like, I think literally the sun, but it's also like another sun god. I mean, to be honest with you, this is pretty esoteric and I didn't really dive too deep into it. All you need to know is it's not like a traditional god that was worshipped like across Egypt.
Okay.
At this point.
So this wasn't common for people to do this.
Exactly.
All right.
I mean, within the Karnak complex, like he built like a whole section to Aten, collectively referred to as Per Aten, or House of the Aten. And there's several temples whose names still exist, actually. I have them written here, and I'm not going to read them. There's too many.
Okay.
Yeah,
look them up, weirdos.
Yeah, you can look them up. I know. I kept them in the notes because I was planning on them. I'm like, yeah, this is too much.
But lots of temples.
Lots of temples. And within the Karnak complex, which is like a really like, that was like the central hub of like Egyptian, like the pantheology or pantheon mythology.
So it's the center of their religious life?
Exactly. So, and like, it's funny because in history, we always want to have like a clean start time and end time when talking about like time periods or epochs, right? Eras, or even just to describe like a shift in attitudes and behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And it's typically like, it's not as cut and dry, but we make it cut and dry just for simplicity's sake. But with Amenhotep IV, we actually have sort of an event that starts his shift from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten.
Oh, interesting.
So the pivotal moment in his reign was either in like the second or third year when he held a festival known as the Sed Festival. And it's interesting because the Sed Festival is typically held to honor and rejuvenate an elderly pharaoh. However, Akhenaten was still very young at this time. At max, he would have been, 26 years old,
26.
probably younger. So while there are many speculations as to why he chose to hold this festival at this time, one thing is certain, and it did mark the beginning of his shift in religious beliefs. So most Egyptologists agree that during this festival, Akhenaten only offered sacrifices and offerings to Aten, rather than all of the gods and goddesses.
Oh, I think that would kind of freak people out, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think so as well. Especially considering that Egyptian society at this point had been around for roughly 2,000 years.
Yeah, and we talk about this on so many other episodes where we talk about ancient religions, but it really was for them real. This isn't like myth and stories and ideas. They really believe like if we don't give these sacrifices, like the Nile's going to flood.
Exactly.
Or there's going to be a famine.
No, you're 100% right.
So that would have been kind of spooky.
Yeah, the gods were very real to the Egyptian people at this time. So Amenhotep IV officially changed his name to Akhenaten, I think sometime during the 5th year of his reign.
Okay, he rebranded.
He rebranded officially to Akhenaten. And by changing his name, Akhenaten threw off the association with Amun in his birth name, right? Amenhotep is like kind of like worshiper of Amun.
Yeah.
And taking on this name, which would honor and show his focus to the new supreme god, the Aten.
Wow,
The
that's
sun
a
disk.
big move.
It's a huge move. It's a stark like departure from pretty much, again, almost 2,000 years of tradition.
That's wild.
Yeah, I mean more or less, right? It's a little bit more complicated than that, but generally speaking, that's the case. And especially, it's a huge deal because Amun or Amun-Ra had been the chief deity in the Egyptian pantheon now for centuries at this point.
Oof. You're pissing off the chief deity?
Yes. So the actual meaning of Akhenaten is unclear, but essentially what we think it means is effective for the Aten.
Oh.
Like I'm an effective ruler for the Aten, the sun disk.
He's flexing that he's effective. I like it.
Dude, I just love these ancient names. Like they are so wild.
The ancient names are always like something that you'd picture like an 80s heavy metal band to pick. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's so true.
I love it though.
I love that as well. Oh my God. Okay. So around the same time in like 1346 roughly BC, Akhenaten decreed that a new capital city be built, Akhetaten, or horizon of the Aten, known today again as Amarna.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, so, and I'm going to refer to it as Amarna. So the city was founded at a site roughly halfway between Thebes, the former capital city known today as Luxor, and Memphis near the Nile Delta.
Okay. Right in the middle of the two big hotspots.
Exactly. And Thebes was the big like power center for the worship of Amun. That's important to know. So now he's like, not only am I worshiping this new god, we're getting this new city built too, homies. So the construction of the city actually was pretty quick. It only took 4 years to complete, more or less.
Of the whole city?
The whole city.
Wow, they should come here to LA to help us with the Olympics.
I know.
We've known for forever and nothing's gotten done.
Nothing. I mean, we've known for years.
Yeah.
Nothing. So, but it's funny though, because to help ensure the speedy construction of the city, buildings were mainly built of mud brick and whitewash, and only the important buildings were actually made of stone.
Okay, never mind. It seems that they cut some corners there.
I was waiting to like say this after you went like, come and bring him to LA.
No, that's okay.
Never mind. Offer revoked.
Yeah.
So historians are unsure of what motivated Akhenaten to move the capital city. However, some scholars believe that he was just trying to distance himself from the temples and again the high priests of Amun and other deities.
I can see that, and maybe start like a new religious hub.
Exactly. I mean, he really wanted to establish the Aten as the primary god of Egypt, and it would seem logical to relocate the central city of the empire, especially something that's so centrally located, right? Because as we will see, like there are military threats to kind of like the northeast, northeast, and from the south as well. And
totally correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Egypt known at this point as like there's like the North Kingdom and the South Kingdom, because that's so prevalent that they get attacks?
Oh yeah, like the lower and upper Egypt.
Yeah.
I think it had been I mean, it had been unified now for thousands of years, but yeah, like, I mean, but even like during intermediate periods, they usually like one power center, or like power centers would be like
in
like
one or the
halved.
other.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, typically like it is big and it has been separated into upper and lower. Upper ironically being southern and lower ironically being northern.
Oh, okay.
That always threw me off as a kid. I hated that. I hated it. I had irrational hatred for that when I was a child.
I had no idea about that when I was a child, so it didn't bother me.
Someone is clearly the bigger nerd here.
Yes.
You're like, yes, that is true. Yeah, and also, I mean, to be honest with you, Amarna was also more centrally and strategically located again, right, being right in the middle. So I think it kind of made sense on two different fronts. So Amarna is also like a fairly unique city to study, as it was essentially like a snapshot of an ancient city once Akhenaten's rule ended, as the city was more or less abandoned for well over 1,000 years up until the Roman period.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. How cool to get to, just rediscover something like that where it is almost frozen in time.
I mean, what's crazy to me is like it could have been rediscovered by the Romans and then lost and then rediscovered it again.
Yeah, that would be so fascinating to look at.
I know. And it would have been crazy ancient to them.
To the Romans. They would have been like, oh my God, this is so cool.
Yeah, exactly. So, and ironically, because of this, because it had been abandoned, it has provided archaeologists and scholars with a very clear idea of the city's planning and infrastructure as it would have been like during his heyday. The city was hastily constructed, but covered roughly 8 miles along the east bank of the Nile. Across the river along the west bank, land was set aside and used for agriculture.
So very smart.
Yeah, it was still like kind of like
effective.
It was effective for Aten. That's both like kind of cool and so lame at the same time.
I agree.
So the city was encircled also by 14 stone tablets called stelae, which were inscribed with Akhenaten's conditions for the establishment of the new capital. And these stone tablets were placed at different time periods, so it kind of told a story of like what had happened during the city.
Oh, that's really cool. Kind of like a journal entry.
Yeah, exactly. And since the city didn't last very long, we know that like things happened, and then like we can kind of corroborate that with archaeology.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. So the earliest dated tablet details the pharaoh's desire to have 7 temples built to Aten, 7 royal tombs built for himself, and the explicit decree that he was to be buried within the city.
Oh my goodness.
That wouldn't happen. Spoilers, yeah. So the city itself was built north to south along a road called the Royal Road, now referred to as the Sikhet es Sultan. The North City is where the royal residences were located, the religious and commercial portion of the city located to the south of that in the central city, and then like the suburbs at the south end was known as the South City.
There you go,
right? Basically, what you need to know is like the largest houses were near the royal palaces in the north, and the farther you got away from like the power base in the north, like the smaller houses would be.
Yeah, we'd be way down there. Teeny tiny southern house.
Hey, Akhenaten, let me tell you about podcasting.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally paid to be in close proximity to power. Lol. Much of what we now understand about life in Amarna comes from these boundary stelae, right, surrounding the city, and it's really cool because like they go all the way up to even right before the city like is kind of abandoned. So it gives like a full life of the city. But we're not going to get into it because that would be a rabbit hole that we could not escape from. So now, though, I want to cover like the immensely important Amarna letters.
All right.
So these were a series of letters that went back and forth between other like foreign dignitaries and either Akhenaten himself or like people like below him, kind of like his scribes and stuff.
And we have these letters?
Yes. It's because these letters were not written on paper or papyrus.
Oh, on stone?
Clay tablets.
Oh, clay. Okay.
Yeah. Which was pretty common during this time amongst like all like kind of this broader Eastern Mediterranean like world.
Yeah. They have access to it and it's a little more malleable, I guess, to write on.
Exactly. And what's really interesting about this time period is this is like the first time in human history that we know of that these kind of larger empires like came about and started to have like full blown like international relations beyond just warfare, but like trade and taxes and like and also just establishing like supply chains. Yeah. And relationships. Like like even non-military relationships.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because of these clay tablets, we see the way that they write to each other. And most of these clay tablets were to like kind of like lesser city states that were almost like suppliants to the pharaoh. So these are like little city states in Canaan, or other like smaller kingdoms in like the Levant.
Okay.
Fewer, but still still very significant. There are letters written back between the pharaoh and like the emperor of the Hittites, the king of the Mitanni, and the king of Babylon.
That would be so amazing to be able to read.
Oh yeah. And it's what's really crazy about these letters is that and it's because of Akhenaten, right, that these letters still exist. And we get a sense of how they viewed each other. So when the lesser kings would write to the pharaoh, it was very clear it was like a client sponsor relationship, more or less, right? But when writing back and forth between like, you know, the king of the Hittites or the king of Babylon, they'd refer to each other as brother. Like my brother,
to
like
signal that they're equals.
Exactly. Like in one instance, there's this one, I don't even remember who it's written to. It might not even been Egypt at all, but I think it was the king of the Hittites wrote to one of them. It might have been the pharaoh, saying like, my brother, like I gave you really cool stuff and the stuff you gave me wasn't up to par.
Wow. He called him
called him out. He's like, because you can't just like ask for money. You have to exchange gifts. It was like this weird kind of like dance.
Of course.
That they do. And you couldn't own like a business or anything that was like really like frowned upon.
Right.
So like basically, you know, it was trade, but without it being traded. It was trade, but like gifts instead.
Right. And he's saying this is not a fair
like,
deal.
Yeah. Like, hey man, like give me more stuff.
Yeah.
And but the way that it's not just like that, it's like the way they write, it's almost poetic. It's like, my brother, like you've offended me. Like am I not worth it to you? Like I hold you in such high regard. You hold me in such low regard, it seems. And this hurts my heart. You know?
Wow. Very formal.
It's very formal. It's fascinating. It's
formal, but you're right. Poetic is a better word.
Yeah. Right. Anyways, I remember learning about the Amarna letters, like actually funny enough in another podcast. I don't remember which one it was, but I just remember being deeply fascinated by these interactions between these like great empires, right?
Fascinating to see how they would have navigated international relations, right? Because I'm sure there's like just so much in between the lines that they're actually saying too, but they can't directly say. Exactly.
And the extent of these international relations was unmatched at this time. Like this was, in fact, would probably be unmatched for up until, you know, maybe like probably the classical age.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, it was
very
significant.
Unique. Yeah.
It was a very unique time, a period of time. So, and what's interesting too, these letters, they're non-hieroglyphs. They're usually in Akkadian. Cuneiform.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, which was kind of like the lingua franca of like the Eastern Mediterranean at this point.
That makes sense then.
Yeah. So it's really cool. The longest surviving tablet, identified as tablet 24, is written actually in a dialect of late Hurrian, and is believed to be the oldest surviving example of that language.
Wow.
And that's now an extinct language. The entire family of languages that Hurrian is from, I think, is all extinct.
The whole language family.
Like it's like a sub language family. Yeah. But yeah, it is.
That's so cool. So not that the languages are extinct, but that we even have this remnant of the language.
Exactly. So the Amarna letters, again, like hold also great importance to both biblical and Semitic scholars because of the insight into the Canaanite culture and language at this time as well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because you also get like Akkadian Canaanite. And so Semitic linguists in particular are interested in how many of the tablets showcase what they refer to as that Proto-Canaanite language, which would ultimately evolve into Hebrew and Phoenician.
Incredible to be able to trace your language roots like that, to see how it evolves and to see what gets lost even. Maybe you could see what fell through the cracks.
Yeah.
Or what stuck through and through.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Oh, fascinating.
Absolutely
I don't know
wild.
anything about studying languages like that, but it fascinates me.
It does me too.
The fact that languages are alive fascinates me.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
They can live and they can die.
And they evolve.
Mm-hmm. It's really trippy.
They like procreate like Latin.
Yes.
Exactly.
They have full-on lives.
Exactly. Even though that might be dead. Like its children are still alive and doing quite well. So basically, long story short, Amarna, really big deal in its heyday as both an administration and religious center. And funny enough, it's still relevant today as an archaeological center. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some sun worship, shall we?
Yeah. I mean, if you're watching this video, you can see that Andrew has been doing some sun worshiping himself lately.
Oh my God, that's a burn, no pun intended.
He's got quite the sunburn.
I got quite a sunburn. It's starting to look like a tan though.
Yeah.
Yeah, look. See?
I can't relate, obviously.
Yeah, no, you can't. Hey, at least I can get burned. So, sun worship had been growing in popularity even before Akhenaten's time, during the reign of his father Amenhotep III. But during the early reign of Amenhotep IV, before he was Akhenaten, worship and offerings to the gods were still permitted, like other gods, and even encouraged.
Okay.
However, there are inscriptions, again, from this early period, which suggest that Amenhotep IV was already starting to kind of like, this odd guy, this Aten, or the Aten, kind of sick.
Way better.
Way better, yeah. So, for example, there's an inscription that can be summarized as telling Egyptians that they should use a level measure to make their payments to the gods, but when measuring for Aten, the payment should be overflowing.
Wow. So still kind of like trying not to freak them out too much. You do your thing, you do your payment to the gods like you've always done. But this guy, this guy's new and he's better and shinier.
Yeah, give them all your money.
Still trying to instill this is superior.
Exactly. This is the superior being.
Yeah, I acknowledge what you have, but this is better.
Exactly. So, super interestingly, the temples built in Thebes during this early period were constructed with open ceilings, so the daytime worship could take place directly under the sun, unlike the closed temples to the other gods. And remember, Thebes was the center for worship to Amun-Ra, not to the Aten.
I bet a lot of people got burns
Oh yeah, I bet.
while worshiping.
I did. So we get a little declaration here. During his second regnal year, Amenhotep IV delivered a speech telling the people that the gods had become ineffective and their temples collapsing. Only Aten remained.
Oh my God, dude.
So, in fact, you know what? I'm going to read a portion of the script as it still remains. And this is obviously translated to English, but, quote, "The temples of the gods fallen to ruin. Their bodies do not endure. Since the time of the ancestors, it is the wise man that knows these things. Behold, I, the king, am speaking so that I might inform you concerning the appearances of the gods. I know their temples, and I am versed in the writings, specifically the inventory of their primeval bodies. And I have watched as they, the gods, have ceased their appearances one after the other. All of them have stopped, except the god who gave birth to himself. And no one knows the mystery of how he performs his tasks. This God goes where he pleases, and no one else knows his going. I approach him, the things which he has made, how exalted they are."
Wow. What are your thoughts about it?
He really loves the Aten. Those are my thoughts. He's kind of a cuckoo.
It's interesting because obviously it's translated. So it's hard for me to tell if to the people he's writing this to, like in its native language, if it would sound as choppy and a little bizarre as it does in English.
Yeah.
Because some of the verbiage choices are bizarre, and that would give me a little hint that there might be some sort of psychosis going on. But I'm just wondering, is that just the translation?
Right.
Where it's going to sound clunky and funny.
Exactly. Like this is like New Kingdom Egyptian. So like not only is this a translation, but you also have to factor in like, okay, we're talking about a Bronze Age person here.
Yeah. Their culture, their world is so different. Maybe it would have made sense to them.
Exactly.
But he's definitely extremely passionate, borderline manic. We don't know.
We don't know. We'll get into that, I think, in a little bit. By a little bit much later. But in his 5th year, Amenhotep IV dismantled the priesthood of the other gods and diverted offerings to the cult of Aten alone.
Oh, shit.
It was also during this time when he changed his name to Akhenaten. So evidence of Akhenaten's suppression of the past religious figures and modes of worship can be found in the workmen's village in the outskirts of Amarna. So this is like the area where like the people were the poorest, basically. So even outside technically of the city. So there's quite a bit of evidence that the workers still worship the traditional gods of the household, such as Bes, the god of war, fertility, childbirth, merriment, and protection, and Taweret, goddess of childbirth, women, and families. Yeah, she's the hippo.
The hippo, yeah.
Yeah.
She's so cute.
Yeah, we're talking about Moon Knight, by the way. Choose a Moon Knight. So, however, any mentions of Amun were harshly carved out, and any temples to him were destroyed.
So he was seen as like the competition to Aten.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel like that's a lot of effort. Like
Yeah.
it sounds so silly, but that's why he's a heretic.
Yeah. And obviously he would have known what I am doing will be perceived as heresy.
Exactly.
And I'm going to do it anyway because either I believe my own BS or I want to piss people off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's fairly accurate. So this evidence, along with evidence found in the chapels related to funerary customs, suggests that while Akhenaten's desire for the Aten to be the sole god worshipped in Egypt, right, his ability to reach the daily lives of the working class folks was quite limited.
I am shocked.
I know, right? They just give up centuries or millennia of like worship of these gods
Because the pharaoh thinks this new god or not new, but new to them so much better.
and he's probably having a manic episode.
Yeah, like what the heck? And obviously this dude, as any pharaoh, would not know jack shit about what the everyday person values and wants and is doing and needs.
Absolutely not. No, this guy is clueless.
Yeah.
Even though like I kind of like Akhenaten a little bit just because he was such a weirdo. Yeah, he was, I think, a little misguided. Personally, that's how I personally feel. So it's funny because it seems that you could be very loyal to Akhenaten as the pharaoh, right? And to even Aten publicly, but you can maintain a more traditional religious view within your like private daily life.
Okay.
And it seems to me also maybe that Akhenaten might have known this and kind of just turned a blind eye.
Yeah, maybe he thought like, well, over time they're going to actually believe.
Exactly. That's just how I think that might have played out. But again, that's just my own personal theory. So, however, there was, as a ruler in like the late Bronze Age and a pharaoh of Egypt especially, you couldn't just like work on religion and like internal measures. You also had to be an adept for like military commander and like a foreign affairs strategist as well.
Absolutely.
Like you, especially during this time period, because you were competing against very powerful empires. So Akhenaten struggled with foreign policy. That was he was not good at this. And he was not a military guy.
Oh man, dude.
Yeah.
You should chill out on the religious zealot vibe and maybe learn some strategy over here.
Yeah, that would have been my personal, I think, advice to Akhenaten.
Yeah, if you were his advisor.
I'd be like, hey, maybe just chill.
Chill on the fan behavior over there.
Yeah, and then like also let's
And
work on
lock
the military
in.
here. Yeah. So lacking like a strong army to deal with the confrontational Hittites near Syria, Egypt slowly began losing its like sphere of influence and power in that region.
That's not good.
In Syria, farther to the north, and then also the Levant. There is evidence to suggest that he was very concerned about the Hittites. However, upon receiving letters from Egypt's allies asking for help defending them against the invaders, he did nothing.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, scholars...
oh my Aten.
Oh my Aten, right? So scholars in the 19th and 20th centuries, they thought that the lack of action on Akhenaten's part, they thought that meant he was a pacifist. However, those claims now are more discredited.
I would never have gone there.
No. Like, while he was certainly more focused on internal affairs, there was evidence that Akhenaten sent military troops to several like smaller borderland cities and provided cities with like instructions for dealing with foreign armies. However, this was clearly not like a core competency of his, right? He did what needed to be done, like, or the bare minimum at the very least, but he was clearly not very good at it. So Akhenaten is known to only have taken a single military action, and that was to stop a rebellion and uprising from Nubian forces. So
Yeah, you got to squash those.
yeah, again, that was a threat from the south.
And again, it's something that he had to do.
Exactly.
It wasn't proactive.
Correct. And also, like, nobody seems to agree on like how big of an operation this was. Was it just like a small scale skirmish, or was it like a full out bloody war? We don't know. So what is certain though is that despite the lack of military conflict, Akhenaten was at least successful in maintaining the stability of central Egypt, only losing like one city to the Hittites, which was, to be honest, more in the Levant region anyways.
Okay.
Given that his counterpart in the Hittite Empire, and I'm going to butcher this name, but it is one of my favorite names to say, Shuplibliuma.
No.
I'm not even joking. Shuplibliuma.
Can I see it?
Yeah, it's right there.
Supili.
Well, no, it's shu because the little accent thing.
Shupilioma.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Shuplibliuma.
I'm sorry, weirdos. We just made you listen to us do that like 10 times. I forgot we were recording.
That's like ADHD, like straight up for you. So this guy was the real deal. Like when it came to the military, like I feel like we could probably do like a mini-sode on him because there's just not a lot of information about him. But like basically knowing how good of a military commander this guy was, this was pretty much the best case scenario for Akhenaten. Like he just, if they ever fought like mano a mano, it would not have gone well.
Okay, so he just got lucky.
He got really lucky. So the last years of Akhenaten's reign is really obscure, and there's very little to no written accounts during this time. But we know through archaeological endeavors, we can reasonably ascertain that there was probably a plague during this time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
People aren't going to be writing stuff down.
Exactly. Also, let's couple this with the recent destruction of Egyptian temples for Amun to make way for more temples to Aten.
Oh, no.
People are going to start getting ideas, right?
Yes.
Again, nothing is written, so this is just my take and theory, but the populace probably was not really thrilled with him like completely revising the Egyptian pantheon, not even revising, more like getting rid of it after, either centuries or millennia of worship, depending on how you look at it.
I bet people would at least be whispering like,
Yes.
hey, I think this plague is because of our heretic king over there.
Yeah, and also let's consider that Egypt was weaker militarily than it had been, as maybe a century prior. So this is not a great recipe for success. So regardless, though, Akhenaten would end up dying after only about 17 years on the throne and was buried in the royal Wadi in Amarna. And again, this is pretty surprising given that he's ascended as pharaoh at the oldest would have been 23.
Yeah, that's young.
So he would have, at the eldest, he was, 40 when he died? It's really young, especially for a pharaoh.
And I assume we don't know the cause of death.
Don't know the cause of death, no.
I'm going to go with poisoning.
Could have been. Mm-hmm. No, it could have been. So, yeah, it does leave room for speculation at the very least. So in the years following Akhenaten's death, his sarcophagus was destroyed and was left in the capital city, and then the capital city was relocated to Thebes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And moving his mummy, they did move his mummy to Thebes, but this is controversial and we'll get into that later. The mummy was again buried in the Valley of the Kings, right? Again, close to Thebes. Mm-hmm. However, the tomb was later desecrated during the reign of Ramesses II, who, ironically enough, actually had a gigantic battle against the Hittites.
Wow.
Called the Battle of Kadesh. And to this day, it is the largest chariot battle in history.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, and actually also, that battle we could even do an episode on, because that is also the first time in history that we have like a detailed record of like how the battle went.
Really?
Like throughout the couple of days it lasted.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Do you know what's really cute about that?
What?
They had like different like sections of the Egyptian army, and they were named after like a god. Like, so like the Amun division.
Oh, that's so
or like,
cute.
yeah, Osiris division. I'm not even joking.
I love that. That's a really good way to try to get them on your side to help you win the battle.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, we're skipping ahead. That's not even relevant to Akhenaten. After Akhenaten's death, it is possible that his son-in-law, Smenkhkare, ruled for a brief period before also dying, followed by Queen Nefertiti taking the throne. And then after that, the famous King Tut, or Tutankhaten at this time, took the throne after Nefertiti died. Mm-hmm. So notice how I said Tutankhaten, not Tutankhamen.
Yeah.
So that was his original name. But in the second year of his reign, he changed his name to Tutankhamun.
Amun.
Yes, abandoning the Aten and the city his father built.
Wow.
Yeah. So slowly, like, the pharaohs and the royal family attempted to erase Akhenaten from memory. So
that's smart. People must have not liked him.
yes. Mm-hmm. And later, when Horemheb became pharaoh, it marked the end of the 18th dynasty and beginning of the 19th dynasty, because he wasn't related to Akhenaten at all. Mm-hmm. And during his reign, Egyptians began to destroy temples and monuments created by Akhenaten to honor the Aten, and reuse the stone to build new temples and monuments to once again honor Amun.
That doesn't surprise me.
Complete like 360 right there.
Yeah, no wonder he gets forgotten.
Yeah. And again, that's like just total reversal of a lot of what Akhenaten did. Later, Seti I also ordered that Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, and King Tut be excised from official lists of pharaohs to make it appear that Amenhotep III was immediately succeeded by Horemheb.
What?
Yeah, isn't that wild?
That's wild.
Yeah. Like
Even though they know that the timelines wouldn't add up.
Oh yeah, they didn't care.
They didn't care.
They didn't care about that stuff. No.
Why Tut? Just because he was his son?
Yeah, he was related to Akhenaten. Okay. We think his son.
Yeah.
But he was certainly related. So let's fast forward to a few thousand years, shall we?
Okay.
So we're going back. So we're actually going to the early 20th century in 1907. Archaeologists find a mummy in the tomb that was believed to be Akhenaten's. However, even after a century of study and analysis, it is still inconclusive who the mummified remains belong to.
What?
So we think that mummy that I referenced earlier that was moved to Thebes and then to the Valley of the Kings, that may or may not be Akhenaten.
Whoa.
We don't know.
So that's why you said controversial.
Exactly. So DNA testing done in 2010 was able to determine that the mummy was related to Tutankhamun, and most likely it was Akhenaten. However, there's not enough evidence to prove exactly like what that relation was.
Yeah.
Like whether it was a father-son match, or it could have been a brother match. It's
uncle,
just,
cousin.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. We just don't know. But there was at least a familial match. So how is Akhenaten like viewed today? It's even now he is a very divisive subject.
Really?
Right. So that's what I thought made him the perfect weirdo.
Yeah.
So some believe that his obsession with the Aten subtly like undermined the religious and social order of Egyptian society and resulted in the slow decline of Egypt's power altogether.
Oh my goodness.
I don't agree with that.
That's putting a lot on this one guy's shoulders.
Exactly, because later on you'd have Ramesses II, who was like kind of, by all accounts, viewed as like the greatest Egyptian pharaoh.
Very good point.
So, and there are other like widespread factors too that I don't buy it. But before Akhenaten, it was believed that the pharaoh was a direct link between the people and their gods.
Yeah.
Like he was seen as the living incarnation of the god Horus and the sun god Amun-Ra, right? Especially Horus. And we even see that with Alexander the Great a millennium later.
They're the god's representative here on Earth, right?
Exactly. So Egyptian citizens would pay homage to the pharaoh and these gods while still celebrating and worshiping their patron gods and smaller deities in their homes and in festivals, like, so not necessarily like centralized under the pharaoh or like, you know, the high priest of Amun-Ra. It becomes a little bit more decentralized now, ironically, because of him.
Yeah, because you had to hide it for a while and habits are hard to break.
Yeah, exactly. And like rather than believing that they must go through the pharaoh, right, the common person, to worship their gods, they could have a more personal connection and worship on their own.
That's kind of nice.
Yeah, I actually believe that to be a positive change.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, they believe that the gods, especially lesser gods, played a more direct role in their daily lives because of this.
Yeah, I think that's sweet. It's like what Martin Luther wanted too, right?
Exactly.
So much time later, but
right.
Someone that was like, we should have a more direct relationship with God.
Isn't that funny? I find that like humanity and history, we often see like themes kind of just repeating like time and time again.
It's so wild. It's almost like, when will humans learn the lesson?
Right.
Probably never.
Never. No. Like I always say, like history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So what was Akhenaten's deal at the end of the day? Was he a visionary or was he a madman who just wanted to disrupt the Egyptian society at its most fundamental level? Despite the cult of Aten being relegated to the fringes of Egyptian society within like a decade or so after his death, his influence on Egyptian society, and that of the entire world really persisted. Like, the big question that we all kind of have with this is like, okay, it should be kind of obvious now. Like, was he a monotheist? Did he at least pave the way for monotheism? Yeah. Right?
Because it seems like he wasn't as into the other gods at very least.
Exactly. And I kind of explain that in a second here, but it's certainly a possibility, especially when considering that Akhenaten's great hymn to the Aten and the biblical Psalm 104 are suspiciously familiar.
Oh, very interesting.
Also, Akhenaten did consider himself to be the son of the sole God, reminiscent of Jesus Christ and God about 1,300 years later.
Wow. Those are some very similar themes.
Very similar themes. So what is certain is that Akhenaten, though, for me, is not a monotheist. Rather, a henotheist, most likely, believing that the Aten was supreme above all gods, but that other gods did exist. He could have possibly been monolatristic. I can never say this word, but it's monolatristic. And it's, we're kind of splitting hairs. Basically, the only difference is like, you believe that other gods exist, but like they shouldn't ever be even talked about or worshipped.
Oh,
or at least
I see.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of esoteric, to be honest, and that's not my like expertise. But again, we're just splitting hairs.
But it does seem like he acknowledged that the other gods existed.
Right. Whether he was monolatristic or henotheist, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, he didn't believe there was just one god.
Exactly. I don't think he was a monotheist. And just before we wrap up, I couldn't not mention his artistic style or the way he was depicted in artwork.
Oh, yeah, tell us.
Similar to Hatshepsut, once again, he was depicted in a very androgynous manner. But obviously, he's a man.
We see that pattern repeat throughout Egyptian history.
Right.
Yeah.
So some earlier Egyptologists initially pointed out that he must have had some sort of disease, but 21st century, archaeologists and
I could see them
Egyptologists,
thinking that.
yeah, they think it that it was more of an artistic style.
Yes.
And that like the taste just simply shifted.
Yeah.
Again, that would make total sense. There is literal precedence for that. Mm-hmm. So the artwork that depicted Akhenaten also depicted his family quite often, which was rare. That was not a traditional view typically. And it seems that he might have been much more of a family man than other pharaohs of the past. Or, it could have just been propaganda that's how he wanted to at least portray himself.
Pious family man.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all speculation, but either way, though, it's different.
Yeah, either way, he thought it was important for his family to be seen.
Yeah, exactly. So, weirdos and Stephanie, what do you think? Was Akhenaten a trailblazer and visionary, or was he just straight bonkers?
Maybe both.
Yeah.
Maybe both.
It's such a cop-out answer, but I think it's the right one.
Yeah, because there definitely seems to be more fanaticism than there would be for someone more mentally stable.
Yeah.
That was the nicest way I could put it. He's definitely a fanatic. But through his fanaticism, he did obviously trailblaze and kind of change culture and change the world.
Yeah, he did.
Even though his name would be forgotten for so long.
Exactly. Like the effects of his rule would persist, even though his name was tried to like be stamped out for all time.
Yeah, you can erase someone's name, but you can't erase essentially their thumbprint on the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that is the story of Akhenaten, the heretic king.
Thank you so much for telling us about him. But before we go, you have to tell us, what do you think? Trailblazer or cuckoo bananas?
Oh, both.
Oh, you agree?
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, well, you called my answer a cop-out, so I thought you had a different answer.
No, I meant, or I was going to say it's a cop-out, but that's also what I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's totally a cop-out, though.
No, it's not.
If I had to pick one.
Yeah.
And gun to my head, only one.
Yeah.
I'd say Trailblazer.
Trailblazer?
Yeah. Still bonkers, but it's both.
That's totally fair. Well, thank you so much for telling us about the Heretic King.
Yes.
I didn't know anything.
Oh yeah, he was a fascinating, he'd been fascinating me for years now. And I definitely wanted to tell his story. And it's difficult. I mean, with any sort of Bronze Age figure, you're just, the lack of sources it's troubling.
I mean, it makes sense. It was so long ago.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you heard it's we don't know when he ascended. We don't know the year he ascended. We don't know how old he was when he died.
We don't know anything.
We don't know much.
As Felicia said, what do we know?
Yeah, exactly.
But thank you for telling us the things that we do know. I'm always happy to go back to various chapters of ancient Egyptian history, as I'm sure many of the weirdos are. And weirdos, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with somebody. That helps the podcast grow. And don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, follow us on Instagram, @HistoryForWeirdos, all the good things.
Yeah, and if you haven't done it by now, what are you doing, man?
Yeah, come on. We're pretty cool.
And you get to see more of Perry.
Yes. And if you join our Patreon, you can watch the video of this and you can watch Perry harass me throughout the episode.
Yeah, and which he did.
And now he's asleep right here.
I mean, I love that dog, but man,
I love how now,
whenever we record at home, he always tries to make it difficult.
Yeah. And I love how right now, if you're still watching the video, you can't see his face. You can only see his butt. It's lovely.
Classic.
Oh, lovely.
Lovely. That's for you, weirdo.
Thank you so much, weirdos. Until next time,
weirdos. Adios.